In the stunned silence following the slap, Ilara's breathing echoed off the vaulted crystalline ceiling. The Emperor's royal guard hesitated, a fatal breach of protocol that would later cost their commander his life. This momentary paralysis gave the thousands of mural recorders in the chamber ample time to capture high-definition footage from every conceivable angle. "You mistake our patience for weakness," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You mistake our diversity for division. You mistake our emotions for evolutionary flaws." The Emperor's compound eyes flickered through a spectrum of colors, ultraviolet rage that humans couldn't perceive, but caused several nearby Cephitan diplomats to emit distress pheromones. His upper mandibles clicked a pattern that the translation matrices refused to process, citing prohibited Imperial Death Code violations. Captain Sharon Liu, head of Earth's small security detail, activated her neural implant to assess the tactical situation. The readout was grim. 17 different weapon systems had locked onto Ilara, ranging from ceremonial but lethal crystalline spears to orbital particle cannons capable of molecular disintegration. Ambassador Chen, Captain Liu vocalized through their secure link, "We have 14 seconds before security protocols mandate a response. Please indicate your preferred extraction strategy." Ilara's slight head shake was imperceptible to all but the most attentive observers. She wasn't finished. "Humanity entered your hegemony in good faith," she continued, addressing not just the Emperor but the entire gathered assembly. "We shared our art, our science, our philosophy, all while your governance algorithms classified us as pre-extinction assets to be harvested." The gasps rippling through the chamber confirmed what Earth's intelligence services had long suspected. Most member species weren't aware of the Empire's true intentions. The Emperor's magnificent crest flared as specialized glands pumped iridescent fluids into the display chambers embedded in his exoskeleton. "You will be processed according to hegemony law," he finally managed, his translator struggling to filter the instinctual death threats from his formal declaration. "Your world status is hereby reclassified to quarantine pending evaluation." The Arthropian diplomatic minister, 18 appendages twitching in precise bureaucratic patterns, floated forward on his gravity disk. "The human's actions constitute a Class 1 sovereign violation. The penalty is..." "Is what?" interrupted Ilara, breaking yet another protocol by speaking over a high minister. "Execution? Planetary sanctions? Or perhaps you'll simply accidentally vaporize another human city during sensor calibrations." The reference to Shanghai silenced the chamber. The incident, officially classified as a tragic navigational error, had claimed 14 million lives, including Ilara's family. The subsequent reparations package had been generous enough to secure Earth's cooperation, but the complete sensor logs had mysteriously disappeared from hegemony archives. The Emperor's personal guard finally broke through their shock-induced paralysis. They surrounded Ilara, their ceremonial armor reconfiguring into battle mode as microfabricators within the metallic surface generated specialized containment fields. "Human Ambassador Chen, you are detained pending judgment," announced the guard captain, his translator set to maximum formality. "Resistance will result in immediate neutralization." As they led her away, Ilara caught sight of the sixth alien observer in the corner, a shadowy figure whose species had been relegated to protected observation status centuries ago. The being's tentacled face twisted into what Ilara somehow recognized as the equivalent of a smile. She had given the galaxy exactly what it needed: proof that humans would not go quietly into extinction. The seventh day of Ilara's trial brought unexpected developments that sent quantum ripples through the hegemony's communication networks. The judgment sphere's translucent walls shifted color hourly to reflect the emotional consensus of the 53 judges, currently a turbulent amber indicating collective uncertainty. The Mentulian Defense Cluster has formally petitioned for reinstatement, announced Chief Adjudicator Vex North, her crystalline exoskeleton chiming softly with each movement. "They claim your rejection violates Protocol 7349B regarding adequate representation of Category 4 species," Ilara stood at the center of the sphere, the gravity fluctuations subtly adjusted to make her feel perpetually off balance. She had refused the stabilizing implants offered by court physicians. "I maintain my right to self-representation," Ilara replied, her voice carrying unusual weight for a being of her size. "And I request the formal admission of Exhibit 117A, the complete neural scans of Shanghai survivors." The chamber erupted. The Arthropian delegation's synchronized mandible clicking created a sound like thousands of scissors snipping in perfect rhythm. "Denied," chittered Imperial Advocate Kraz Tiln. "The incident at Shanghai has been legally resolved through appropriate reparations. Furthermore, neural imprints of primitive emotional responses are not admissible as evidence under hegemony statute, because your laws systematically exclude precisely the evidence that would condemn you," Ilara interrupted, triggering automatic censorship in 17 sectors, where interrupting officials was classified as cognitive terrorism. "Convenient legal architecture," Advocate. From his observation pod, the Emperor's pheromones signaled extreme discomfort as billions of viewers across the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented. A single individual challenging the entire legal framework of the hegemony. The trial took an unexpected turn when Feed 12, one of the court-mandated observation drones, malfunctioned, projecting unauthorized footage directly into the proceedings. The images showed quiet scenes from Earth: children flying kites in reclaimed Shanghai Memorial Park, street musicians in Lagos, farmers tending rice terraces in Bali, scientists at the lunar colony launching quantum satellites. This unauthorized sentimentality is irrelevant. The Arthropian Advocate's translator, nearly overloaded as his actual clicking, contained death threats forbidden in formal proceedings. On the contrary, Ilara responded calmly. "These images demonstrate exactly what your empire finds so threatening: humans living as individuals within community, creating art without central direction, pursuing science without genetic predetermination, feeling emotions without implanted regulators." Chief Adjudicator Vex Norith's sensory filaments quivered. As a member of one of the oldest hegemony species, she retained vestigial emotional receptors that her younger colleagues lacked. Ambassador Chen explained this concept of individual within community. "Our records show such societal structures collapsed in 37 previous species." Ilara smiled for the first time since the trial began. "Exactly. 37 species that the Arthropian Empire classified as threats and eliminated before they could demonstrate viability." The chamber fell silent. Even the Emperor's guards ceased their ritualistic position shifts. "Speculation," clicked the Imperial Advocate. "Fact," Ilara countered. "And I can prove it, if the Council will permit me to call my first witness, Vrij of the Nixthalian Remembrance." The name sent visible shock through the Arthropian delegation. The Nixthalians were believed extinct for 12 millennia, their planet reduced to an agricultural resource world after a natural extinction event. As the hooded figure glided from the observation gallery, its tentacled face briefly visible, the Emperor's guards moved to block its path. Too late. Billions across the galaxy had already seen what the hegemony had hidden for thousands of years: the survivors of a species supposedly extinct, living in secret resistance. The Judgment Sphere's atmospheric processors trained to keep pace with the elevated respiration of 2,000 spectators as Ilara activated the contraband neural imprinter. The device, no larger than her thumbnail, had been smuggled in by an unlikely ally, a maintenance caste Arthropian, whose genetic lineage had been deemed imperfect due to an aberrant tendency toward curiosity. "What you are about to experience," Ilara explained to the Council, "is what humans call righteous indignation, an emotional state that your species has engineered out of yourselves, yet remains a cornerstone of human ethical development." Chief Adjudicator Vex North raised a stabilizing appendage. "The Council has not authorized." Too late, the imprinter pulsed, bypassing cognitive filters to directly stimulate the vestigial emotional centers in the council members' brains. Most of these neural pathways had been dormant for generations, carefully pruned through selective breeding and genetic modification, but never completely eliminated, a biological failsafe even the Arthropians hadn't dared remove entirely. The effect was immediate and chaotic. 3 council members began the emergency molting process, their exoskeletons cracking prematurely as stress hormones flooded their systems. Asignan representatives' bioluminescent display organs flashed emergency patterns not seen in public for millennia. The chief adjudicator herself froze in mid-gesture, appendages trembling as ancient neural pathways reactivated. Only the Emperor remained outwardly unaffected, his advanced emotional suppressors working at maximum capacity. "This is precisely the weakness we eliminated," he declared, mandibles clicking in precise, controlled patterns. "The inefficiency of emotional processing, the vulnerability to manipulation, the irrational." Ilara cut him off. "And yet your empire faces its greatest threat not from our weapons, but from our songs. Not from our armies, but from our poetry. Your citizens risk execution to experience simulated human emotions in underground parlors on 100 worlds." She gestured to the gallery, where several spectators wore illegal neural receivers tuned to human emotional frequencies, devices now common in the black markets of hegemony worlds. "Ambassador Chen," interjected the still trembling chief adjudicator, "you claim these emotional responses serve evolutionary functions. Elaborate." Ilara nodded. "Emotional bonding created human families and communities that survived conditions that would have exterminated more efficient social structures. Our non-linear problem-solving, what you dismissively call impulsivity, allowed us to find solutions your optimization algorithms could never predict." The Emperor's control finally slipped. "Enough. These primitive responses led 37 species to extinction. We saved the galaxy from chaos through necessary modification." "Did you?" Ilara asked quietly, activating a holographic display showing genetic analysis of the council members. "Or did you simply eliminate potential competitors who might have created a different kind of order?" The data scrolled before the stunned audience. Chromosome maps showing artificial suppression of specific genes related to empathy, creativity, and emotional bonding. The same genes that in humans correlated with revolutionary scientific breakthroughs, artistic masterpieces, and social innovations. On Earth, the response to this revelation was as characteristically diverse as humanity itself. Artists in Rio created massive hand-shaped sculptures from reclaimed materials. Engineers in Nairobi developed open-source emotional translation matrices for cross-species communication. Hackers in Singapore bypassed imperial communications protocols to broadcast human music directly to hegemony worlds, causing spontaneous public gatherings that imperial authorities struggled to disperse. A particularly striking image circulated through the Galactic networks, an elderly Shanghai survivor pressing her hand against the memorial wall, the silhouette perfectly matching the now ubiquitous symbol of human resistance. Beneath it, a simple message in both human and hegemony script. "We feel, therefore we are." The Emperor watched his carefully maintained order unraveling in real time, and for the first time in his 300-year reign, experienced something his species had engineered away millennia ago. The Imperial Guards surrounded the trembling archival authority aide, their weapon appendages unfolding with lethal precision. The young Syntheri, 6 willowy limbs now rigid with fear, had committed the Empire's highest treason, but seemed oddly at peace with the consequences. "My designation is Processing Unit 7 Lambda 3, the aide announced, voice modulator fluctuating between determination and terror. "My assigned genetic template prohibited curiosity beyond classification parameters." One of the Guard's molecular disruptors hummed to activation frequency. "Yet I experienced questions," the aide continued, bioluminescent spots pulsing along their translucent skin in what humans would later learn was an expression of defiance. "After witnessing Ambassador Chen's defense, I underwent illegal neural restoration. Ilara stepped between the aide and the guards. This brave individual risked everything to reveal historical truth. Their actions deserve recognition, not punishment. The chief adjudicator, still processing the emotional aftereffects of the neural imprinter, made an unprecedented procedural decision. The evidence crystals will be admitted. The treason charges, she hesitated, compound eyes flickering through decision matrices, will be assessed after evaluation of said evidence. As the crystal data initialized, the judgment sphere's holographic system struggled to process the vast historical archive. The projection stabilized to reveal an ancient Arthropian military complex, time-stamped from the Empire's early expansion period. The footage showed laboratory chambers where captured members of now-extinct species underwent vivisection procedures, their neural tissues extracted for analysis. Specimen 12KX exhibits excessive emotional bonding behaviors, narrated an ancient Arthropian scientist, mandibles clicking in the Archaic dialect that modern translation matrices could barely process, recommended for immediate extinction processing. Their adaptability combined with pack bonding presence, Category 1 competitive threat. The footage shifted to planetary surveys, each cataloging species against the Empire's threat matrix. Species after species received the same evaluation. Emotional capacity presents nonlinear evolutionary threat, recommended for preemptive pacification. The Emperor's security detail attempted to terminate the display, but the crystals had interfaced directly with the sphere's core systems, a backdoor built into the architecture by resistance programmers over centuries. The final recording emerged from the Emperor's private war chamber just months earlier. The current Emperor, surrounded by genetic strategists, reviewed holographic displays of Earth. Their creativity index exceeds safety parameters, reported a military advisor, manipulating a display showing human art, music, and scientific achievements. They've developed 78 distinct philosophical frameworks for ethical decision-making, without central direction. Most concerning, added another strategist, they demonstrate unprecedented capacity for cross-species empathy. Already, 17 lower caste Arthropians have requested reassignment after cultural exchanges with humans. The Emperor's response came in the exact phrase he had spoken to Ilara before she struck him. Earth is a primitive backwater barely worth the oxygen its inhabitants consume. The recording continued, revealing the Empire's standard extinction protocol. Begin Phase 1 atmospheric modification. Calculate resource reclamation potential. Prepare cultural sterilization algorithms. As the recording ended, a frozen image remained, the Emperor pointing to Earth on the galactic map while activating the ancient coded phrase that for 50 millennia had marked a species for extinction. The silence that followed was broken by a sound never before heard in the judgment sphere: applause. It began with a small contingent of human observers, but spread to representatives of a dozen hegemony species whose emotional suppression had begun to falter after exposure to human cultural transmissions. The Emperor rose from his observation pod, mandibles vibrating in the Imperial Combat Challenge frequency. This manufactured evidence is dismissed. I invoke Emergency Protocol Omega-9. But something unprecedented happened. His royal guard hesitated, their compound eyes shifting between their Emperor and the damning evidence still hovering above the chamber. For the first time in the hegemony's history, an Imperial command went momentarily unheeded. Admiral Helena Rousseau stood before the United Earth Defense Council, her holographic presentation showing the deployment of Operation Open Hand across 17 key hegemony systems. The Emperor expected us to either surrender or prepare for conventional warfare, she explained, gesturing to the strategic overlay. Instead, we've launched the largest coordinated non-military operation in human history. Councillor Zhang frowned. Your confidence is admirable, Admiral, but we're deploying cultural ambassadors against a species that has exterminated hundreds of civilizations. Precisely, Rousseau replied, toggling to a new display showing real-time data from the hegemony's military response grid. Their extinction protocols are designed to counter armed resistance or submission. Our approach has created a strategic blind spot they cannot process. The data confirmed her assessment. Arthropian battle fleets remained in holding patterns, their targeting systems cycling through weapon solutions for threats that never materialized. Instead of warships, they encountered civilian vessels broadcasting everything from Bach concertos to Bollywood dance sequences. On Centauri Prime, a major hegemony manufacturing hub, human cultural attaches had established improvisation workshops that violated every protocol in the Empire's rigid social hierarchy. Security forces dispatched to arrest the humans found themselves invited to participate in collaborative art projects instead of facing expected resistance. The psychological impact is spreading faster than their censorship algorithms can contain it, reported Dr. Imani O'Keefe, Earth's leading genopsychologist. Their communication networks show a 3,700% increase in unauthorized transmissions related to human cultural concepts. Most surprising was the response from the Imperial homeworld itself. Underground emotion simulation parlors, once small, secretive establishments, had expanded into public gathering spaces where Arthropians of all castes experienced carefully calibrated doses of human emotional states. The counselors watched footage of a lower-caste maintenance worker experiencing music for the first time, their exoskeleton vibrating in resonance with a Vivaldi violin concerto, while chromatic patterns rippled across their sensory receptors. We've received over 2,000 defection requests from hegemony citizens in the past 48 hours. Admiral Rousseau continued, mostly from species who've maintained vestigial emotional capacity despite imperial genetic programs. The diplomatic feed from Ilara's detention facility revealed the most startling development. Her simple prison uniform, a gray jumpsuit with the hand-shaped emblem of human resistance, had become the most replicated clothing pattern in hegemony history. Fabrication units across 17 systems had been reprogrammed to produce the garment, often with additions reflecting the wearer's native species. They're calling it the hand that freed the mind, Dr. O'Keefe explained, showing holographic footage of a massive public gathering on Proxima I, where beings of diverse physiologies pressed their appendages together in the now universal symbol. The Emperor's response played next, a desperate emergency broadcast that inadvertently confirmed the truth of Ilara's accusations. His mandibles twitched uncontrollably as he denounced human culture as a dangerous cognitive contagion and ordered immediate emotional quarantine procedures for any citizens exposed to Earth transmissions. The broadcast cut abruptly when a member of his own communications staff, wearing a makeshift version of Ilara's uniform, interrupted the transmission to play a recording of human children singing. They expected us to fight like them, Admiral Rousseau concluded. But our greatest weapon was never our technology. Counselor Nakamura, who had lost his daughter in the Shanghai incident, quietly completed her thought. Our greatest weapon was always our humanity. In the detention facility light years away, Ilara received an unexpected visitor, the Arthropian guard captain, his ceremonial armor missing the imperial insignia. Ambassador, he chittered, mandibles forming the closest approximation to a human smile his physiology allowed. I have questions about this thing your species calls poetry. The ancestral combat arena on Saltraxis hummed with energy as engineers rushed to modify the ancient battleground for the unprecedented duel. Crystalline structures that had once amplified the sounds of physical combat were hastily recalibrated to optimize acoustics for verbal exchange. Environmental systems designed to disadvantage non-Arthropian physiologies were neutralized under the watchful eyes of newly appointed neutral observers. Emperor Zornval Xi emerged from his preparation chamber, his battle kitten gleaming with bioluminescent threat displays. The ancient armor, worn by his genetic lineage for 50 millennia, incorporated specialized glands that secreted combat pheromones designed to trigger submission responses in opponent species. Today, these biological weapons activated at maximum potency, flooding the arena with molecular signals that would have paralyzed most adversaries. The Emperor invokes the protection of ancestors, announced the Imperial Herald, voice modulators amplifying his proclamation across the arena, as is his right under the ancestral combat code. This declaration allowed the Emperor to bring his 12 thought archivists, genetically modified beings who served as living repositories of Arthropian philosophy. Their cranial cavities, vastly enlarged and filled with specialized neural tissue, contained the accumulated strategic wisdom of thousands of years. Each archivist represented a different philosophical discipline, from imperial dominance theory to evolutionary necessity doctrine. The spectators, both physically present and watching via quantum entanglement networks across the galaxy, murmured in anticipation. The Emperor had invoked every possible advantage permitted by the ancient code. Ilara entered alone, wearing only a simple environmental suit necessary for her survival in the toxic Saltraxian atmosphere. The contrast could not have been more stark. The towering Emperor with his battle armor and 12 brain-enhanced advisors versus a single human female in basic protective gear. The human invokes no ancestral protection, noted the herald with barely disguised contempt. She stands alone. Ilara smiled. Not alone. I stand with 5 billion years of human evolution, with every society that valued freedom over control, with every being across the galaxy who chooses connection over isolation. Her words, transmitted without imperial censorship for the first time, caused visible disturbances in viewing centers across 17 systems. On New Jakarta, a group of maintenance caste Arthropians spontaneously molted their work carapaces. On Proxima Centauri IV, beings gathered in public spaces, defying imperial curfew orders. The Emperor's primary thought archivist initiated the philosophical offensive, its enhanced brain pulsating visibly beneath translucent membranes. The evolutionary record is unambiguous. It began, neural pathways illuminating, as it accessed millennia of carefully curated data. Emotional species invariably self-terminate through irrational conflict. Imperial guidance is not merely beneficial but necessary for galactic stability. Holographic displays materialized around the arena, showing mathematical models predicting the collapse of emotional civilizations. The models, refined over thousands of years, presented compelling evidence of inevitable self-destruction for species retaining emotional capacity. Of 143 identified emotional species observed before imperial intervention, continued the archivist, all entered terminal decline within 3,000 stellar cycles. The evidence is mathematically irrefutable. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in patterns signaling absolute certainty, the perfect moment to crush human exceptionalism with the weight of imperial data. Ilara studied the models quietly, her expression contemplative rather than defensive. Then she did something that violated every imperial debate protocol. She walked directly toward the Emperor's viewing platform, ignoring the security fields that hummed to alertness around her. "I request environmental suit removal," she announced calmly. "I wish to address the Emperor directly, breathing the air of his world." The stunned silence that followed reflected the unprecedented nature of her request. No non-Arthropian had ever voluntarily exposed themselves to Saltraxis' toxic atmosphere. The Imperial medical observers chittered in disbelief, their instruments calculating a survival window of less than 15 minutes for human physiology under such conditions. After a moment of visible calculation, the Emperor gestured his approval. This human would damage herself for philosophical principle, further evidence of emotional irrationality. He would allow it. As Ilara's environmental suit hissed open, the galaxy collectively held its breath. The caustic air of Saltraxis burned Ilara's lungs with each breath. Medical monitoring drones hovered nearby, their sensors registering the rapid deterioration of her respiratory system. Yet she stood unwavering, facing the Emperor across a distance now charged with more than philosophical differences. "Your mathematical models are elegant," she acknowledged, voice raspy from the corrosive atmosphere. "But they contain a fundamental flaw. They measure civilizational success solely through duration and stability." The Emperor's compound eyes flickered in the pattern indicating mild surprise. He had expected desperate emotional appeals, not methodological critique. Stability is the foundation of progress, intoned the second thought archivist, its enhanced cranium pulsing with neural activity. Imperial archives document 7,342 years of uninterrupted technological advancement under guided evolution. Ilara nodded, then activated a historical immersion field that transformed the arena into a panoramic display of Earth's most devastating moments. Mushroom clouds blooming over cities, glaciers collapsing into warming seas, refugee caravans stretching across barren landscapes. Humanity has nearly destroyed itself multiple times, she admitted, the honesty of her statement creating ripples of confusion among Imperial observers trained to expect propaganda. We have waged wars that scared our planet. We have altered our climate through ignorance and greed. We have created weapons that could have ended our existence. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in triumph as his archivists hastily catalogued these admissions as evidence for Imperial doctrine. Their neural tissue pulsed with vindication. But Ilara wasn't finished. The historical immersion field shifted, showing what followed each catastrophe. International peace conferences after world wars, environmental remediation projects transforming polluted wastelands into thriving ecosystems, nuclear disarmament treaties signed by former enemies. What your models fail to capture, she continued, pausing to suppress a cough as the toxic air damaged her vocal cords, is that our greatest achievements arise directly from our greatest failures. Our capacity for destruction is matched by our capacity for renewal. The medical drone's urgent beeping intensified as her oxygen saturation levels dropped dangerously. The Emperor, sensing advantage in her physical distress, signaled his third archivist to deliver what they believed would be the decisive argument. Emotional decision-making is demonstrably inferior, the archivist proclaimed, its neural pathways illuminating as it accessed the Imperial knowledge base. Quantitative analysis of 438 trillion decisions across 18,000 civilizations proves that emotion-influenced choices result in optimal outcomes 32% less frequently than algorithm-guided alternatives. This statistical attack, perfected over millennia, had destroyed countless philosophical opponents. The arena fell silent as spectators awaited Ilara's inevitable capitulation to mathematical certainty. Instead, she walked closer to the Emperor, each step clearly causing her physical pain as the toxic atmosphere continued its assault on her human physiology. "May I show you something?" she asked quietly. The Emperor, mandibles clicking in what translated as cautious assent, watched as she activated a personal holographic projector. The image that materialized between them was intimate in scale, visible only to the Emperor and nearby observers. It showed 3 humans, a woman with Ilara's features, a man with kind eyes, and a small child with both their characteristics blended. The family was captured in a moment of simple joy, sunlight filtering through trees as they shared a meal in a garden. "My family," Ilara explained, her voice barely audible as her lungs struggled, "lost in Shanghai." The Emperor's compound eyes fixed on the image, multifaceted surfaces reflecting the holographic light. The arena remained silent, the galaxy watching as Ilara reached toward the Emperor with an open hand. "I forgive you," she said simply, not as Earth's ambassador, but as Ilara Chen, who loved and lost them. The concept, forgiveness without strategic advantage, created a cognitive cascade failure among the thought archivists. Their enhanced brains, optimized for Imperial philosophy, encountered a paradox they could not resolve. An action with no evolutionary benefit to the actor, no strategic advantage, no resource gain. The Emperor's exoskeleton trembled visibly as his translator struggled to process the concept. "This forgiveness serves what function?" Ilara smiled through obvious pain. "It serves no function. It benefits me in no way. It cannot bring back what was lost. I forgive because holding hatred diminishes what makes us human." The neural tissue of the primary archivist began to physically reorganize in response to this paradoxical input, creating new connections that its genetic programming had been designed specifically to prevent. Across the arena, The other archivists experienced similar transformations, their specialized brain matter adapting to accommodate concepts outside imperial parameters. The Emperor, facing something entirely outside his philosophical framework, experienced the unprecedented emotion his species had engineered away millennia ago: genuine confusion. The Emperor's magnificent exoskeleton began to crack along previously invisible stress lines, a physiological response his species hadn't displayed in recorded history. Hairline fractures spread across his ceremonial carapace as concepts engineered out of Arthropian psychology millennia ago overwhelmed neural pathways never designed to process them. "Impossible," he stammered, mandibles spasming uncontrollably. "Forgiveness without advantage is, mathematically, irrational." Iridescent ichor leaked from his sensory organs as battle arms twitched in uncoordinated patterns. His translator struggled to convert his increasingly fragmented thoughts into coherent language, producing disjointed phrases about emotional contamination and cognitive quarantine protocols. Throughout the hegemony, the unprecedented sight of their infallible ruler's vulnerability triggered cascading reactions. On the imperial homeworld, lower caste Arthropians began questioning genetic doctrines for the first time, their previously suppressed neural pathways activating in response to the Emperor's distress. Worker collectives formed spontaneously, sharing unauthorized observations and experiences through hastily established communication networks. The proving grounds erupted in chaos when representatives from 17 previously subjugated species rushed the central platform. The security forces, their behavioral programming conflicted by contradictory imperatives, stepped aside rather than engaging. These representatives carried not weapons but evidence, hidden historical records of their civilizations before imperial guidance had stripped them of cultural identities. "Before the Empire came, we created this," announced a Tellurian ambassador, activating a holographic display of mathematical music. Complex harmonies based on prime number relationships that had once been their species' highest art form before emotional expression was bred out of them. A Nixthalian archivist unveiled ancient texts documenting their philosophical tradition of multiple perspective truth, a cognitive framework the Empire had classified as dangerously destabilizing and systematically erased from their neural patterns. The Galactic Council, convened an emergency session, found itself unable to maintain traditional voting blocks as representatives broke with millennia of predictable alignment. The debate stretched across 7 full rotational cycles as factions formed and reformed around competing visions for a post-imperial galaxy. When the final vote came, to dissolve the hegemony and establish a new galactic cooperative, it passed by a margin of just 3 votes, the closest decision in council history. Ilara, still recovering from respiratory damage sustained during the debate, was summoned to the newly renamed Chamber of Voices on Saltraxis. There, representatives of 7,000 worlds unanimously invited humanity to lead the drafting committee for a new galactic charter. The chamber fell silent as Ilara slowly rose from her seat, medical drones hovering discreetly nearby to monitor her still healing lungs. "On behalf of Earth, I must decline," she announced, creating immediate confusion among species who had never encountered refusal of power when offered. "Not because we lack interest in this new beginning, but because the future must be shaped by all voices, not directed by one." Instead, Ilara requested a position that baffled many imperial species, to serve as a teacher of human history, both its triumphs and its catastrophic failures. Any new covenant must acknowledge both the extraordinary potential and dangerous flaws inherent in all sentient life, she explained. "We must learn from our collective past, not erase it." 3 months later, the first cooperative council session on Saltraxis featured an innovation never before seen in the ancient chamber: modular environmental sections allowing species with incompatible biological needs to collaborate in person rather than through proxies or remote interfaces. Evolutionary biologists documented an unexpected phenomenon during these initial sessions, the emergence of new neural patterns across multiple species as they engaged in both rational and emotional modes of problem-solving. Arthropians developed enhanced sensory receptor cells responsive to artistic stimuli. Cephidian philosophers incorporated emotional variables into previously rigid logical frameworks. As the first year of the cooperative concluded, representatives gathered for a ceremony honoring the transition. One by one, beings of every physiological configuration pressed their native appendage, whether hand, claw, tentacle, or pseudopod, into a common substrate, creating a monument representing unity and diversity. Across its base, in 18,000 languages, ran the new covenant of galactic civilization. We acknowledge our differences. We learn from our failures. We rise together, with open hands. The former emperor, his exoskeleton regrown in simpler patterns without imperial insignia, approached Ilara at the ceremony's conclusion. "I still do not fully comprehend this human concept of forgiveness," he admitted, his translator now set to conversational rather than imperial register. "But I find myself curious to learn." Ilara smiled, extending her hand, the same hand that had struck him and changed the galaxy forever. "That's a very human sentiment," she replied. "Let's start there."